T Show is intended for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. Live long and prosper, bitches.
Shall we just start right off the bat with a Las Vegas update?
Are we still talking Vegas, right?
We are.
Talking about Vegas.
Yes.
You're coming to Vegas, right?
Star Trek Las Vegas may take place every August, but on this show...
This is where we hang out the rest of the year.
Exactly.
The crew has been fatigued now from so many months in space, and they need to take a break. The landing party has been down to check out the terrain while the crew gets ready to play. They say there's only plant life living on this lovely rock, but a rodent up here's wearing a vest.
Jolan True, bitches, and welcome to another G&T Supplemental Log, this time from the floor of Star Trek Las Vegas 2014 convention. I'm Gettysburg 7. To my left, your right, there she is wearing her Orion Slave Girl outfit. I think it's an extra E cup size. Terry Lynn.
And I'm doing science.
She's doing science. That's a joke. With us is Mr. George Pappy, who can talk about the Green Girl. Why would that be, sir?
Wow, I'm glad you asked. It just so happens that I made a documentary about the original Green Orion slave girl, Susan Oliver.
She was an accomplished woman, well beyond being known as the Green Girl.
Oh, absolutely. She was, and this is no exaggeration, probably the premier female guest star of 60s television, which it's no coincidence that Gene Roddenberry cast her for that very important role in the original pilot as Veena.
She had such an all-American appeal, a beauty, but still that Marilyn Monroe sultriness.
Oh, yeah. She had been a big Warner Brothers contract player in 1957-58. And the reason she wound up in television, she broke her contract to do a play on Broadway and upset Jack Warner and got kind of blackballed out of the film industry.
Really?
So you got this amazing acting talent. There's only one place, other than Broadway, there's only one other place you could go, and that was television. And it happened to be a time when that was a great time to be a guest star, because you could really showcase, especially on these shows like... I know there's a lot of, in the Star Trek circles, derisive bent towards Wagon Train, but that was great in the sense that if you were the guest star of that show, it was your show. And it was a showcase for a heck of a lot of major talent, including a lot of the Star Trek people.
To fully enjoy Star Trek, you have to enjoy Western, because the way Gene Roddenberry set it up.
No, absolutely. So
even if you don't like Westerns, it's hard to describe to people that say, well, I hate Westerns, but that Wagon Train to the Stars that we all know the phrase, which actually didn't come till later.
Yeah, we know.
But yet, no, also behind the camera, she was an amazing woman.
That is correct. She went on, and she'd always been interested in it, and it was very hard for women to direct. In fact, we have a section in the documentary where all these guys, and even some of the women, they're like, we never were directed by women. We didn't even know women could direct. It never occurred to anybody that a woman could direct. She was part of the original AFI Directing Workshop for Women in 1974, along with Ellen Burstyn, Lily Tomlin, Kathleen Nolan, who's in the documentary, and even Maya Angelou was in that bunch, and I believe Margot Kidder, too. Yeah.
Maya Angelou?
Yeah. So, and then it took her quite a while to get a gig. Even with those credentials, I think finally in the early 80s she did a MASH, one of 5 women to direct a MASH, and she did a Trapper John M.D. She was the first woman that ever directed on that show. She encountered a lot of hostility. They really were not very...
Now, did that, the hostility, I'm sure, was just kind of an inherent part of our society at the time.
Right.
But did that come down from the studios, or was it just because it was an inherent...
Oh, I think it was just more the crews. They were good old boy crews, Basically, crews were white guys.
Right.
That was it. And the only place you had as a woman was in front of the camera. Or maybe something like Script Girl or that kind of makeup.
Well, and in Star Trek, Dorothy Fontana had to use the initials DC.
That's right, exactly. Same kind of mentality.
So now, she never felt the need to hide her gender, though, as a director, did she?
No, and it was not like she could. Everyone knew who she was.
Everyone knew
yeah.
Right.
But the sad part is, she kind of didn't really get much opportunity after that, and she spent the last couple of years of her life trying to convince Paramount to let her direct The Next Generation. And they told her she lacked the necessary special effects qualifications, which we have Nancy Malone in the documentary. She directed 2 Voyagers. And she said, I don't know anything about special effects. That's why they have a whole department for that. It's just a BS thing they would tell women. If you look at the record of Next Generation, there were only 2 women directors in 7 years. And
Gates was one of them.
And Gates told me, I was unfortunately not able to get her in front of the camera. Our schedules wouldn't sync up. She called me last summer and said she was the only one that came in on that show with directing experience before the show from her theater stuff. And she's a theater professor and all. And yet they let Stewart and Frakes and Burton all direct multiple episodes before they finally let her do one. It's just, they did not let women direct.
Very interesting. I mean, it's frustrating and yet still very interesting. Now, what was it that got her? What did she do to get her foot in the door in that regard? Did she have to go and bark and bark and bark, or was she just? Did somebody feel sorry for her one day?
I think it was a combination of all of the above. I mean, the AFI thing was a start. She did do a short film. It's actually a wonderful short film. We show a nice clip of it in the movie. And she had a hell of a cast in it. It's got Lurch, Ted Cassidy, Woody Strode, African-American actor who goes way back. I think I've heard Quentin Tarantino says he's one of his favorite actors.
Oh, wow. And that's something, because Tarantino's faint with praise.
That's right. And it also has Will Sampson from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the Indian chief, and this crazy character named Biff Maynard, who was a Playgirl Playmate of the Year, and he was a big fixture at the Comedy Store back in the day. And he was real close with Susan. He rented her cottage out in front of her estate. And it's a great little film. But even then, it took her another 7 years to get the MASH. And I suspect part of what happened there is, if you look at that, only 5 women directed in the 11 years of that show. And except for Elaine May, who did it in 75 or 6, she was kind of a big deal.
Mike Nichols.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, the other 4 women were on the last 2 years, and I suspect that was Alan Alda.
Right.
You know, he was very progressive, and he had a lot of influence by that point. And it's funny, one of the others of that 4 that did it in the early 80s was Gabrielle Beaumont, who was the only other woman that directed Next Generation. She was a special case because she came from England and had cut her teeth on the BBC in the 70s. And when she came here, she already had credibility. She'd been directing for quite a while. It was kind of hard for them to dismiss her.
Right.
But so I think it was all of the above that got her foot in the door on the MASH. The MASH came out beautifully. She did the first episode of the last season, one that featured Nurse Kelly. It was like her big breakout role.
I remember that one.
Yeah, it was all her. It was called Hey, Look Me Over. And she gets in Hawkeye's face.
Hawkeye about you tried to sleep with every other woman in the camp.
Yeah, that's Susan's episode.
Oh my God, I cried so hard on that.
That's Susan Oliver's episode.
That's Susan Oliver's episode. So she did a wonderful job, and it came out very well. Then they put her on this Trapper John MD the following year. It was one with Shirley Hemphill from What's Happening, and Anne Francis was the other guest star. And it's just a bad script. The B story is they sneak a dog in and disguise it as a patient so they can give it free veterinary care. It's just, it's not exactly like that show was known for brilliant scripts to begin with. But apparently the crew treated her horribly, and we got a couple people in the cast to confirm that. And then it didn't do very well in the ratings, so it's suddenly her fault.
Her fault.
And if you know anything about television at that time, I mean, this is a show in its 5th season. Same crew shot the 96 episodes before hers. These actors have been doing this for 5 years. There's nothing she could possibly have done to screw it up in the 10 days she was there. But they blamed her.
It's the writing, yeah.
Yeah, they blamed her. She didn't really get any chances after that. It's kind of like, we gave you your 2 shots, that's it, you're done.
Now, you mentioned that she was at the AFI workshop with Ellen Bernson.
Yeah.
And Maya Angelou and Lily Tomlin. What caused Susan to not be remembered the way the name that she should be?
Well, I think it's part of it is she just refused to be tied down in any way, shape, or form. And it starts with that Warner Brothers contract. She broke it in '58. They wanted her to come. She was in New York doing a play on Broadway. In fact, it was Look Back in Anger. She replaced Mary Ure, who is the original lead her husband, John Osborne, wrote the play, and Susan stepped in to take over the role, and Warner Brothers called her back to be in Up Periscope with James Garner. And she read the script, and she's famously said, I said, up your Periscope, and broke my contract. And the rumor is that Warner was, well, it's true, Jack Warner was a very vindictive guy.
Right.
And probably called around and said, that's it, she's done in this industry. And those guys all scratched each other's backs like that. If someone wanted someone blackballed, they were blackballed. So that starts it. Then she gets into TV, and she turned down at least 3 series. She didn't want to be locked into a series. So, I mean, you look at, for instance, who would know who Florence Henderson was if it weren't for the Brady Bunch? I mean, or even you wonder how well Elizabeth Montgomery would be remembered today, or Barbara Eden, if it weren't for those series.
Right.
But so she never had that. She did have a run on Peyton Place. In fact, she was hugely popular on that, and then all of a sudden she's just written out 4 months in, and the suspicion is she was responsible for that. So she'd had enough. 4 months of a grueling that show was on 3 nights a week, and she was done. And then she did the same thing in the 70s. She replaced the original Dr. Laura Horton on Days of Our Lives 10 seasons in. And I think they thought, okay, we got our next 10 seasons. She quit after 8 months. She just didn't want to be locked into anything. She could go and do this. And she was, should we wait for this? All right, she could come in, and that was one of her strengths. She's such a good actress with very little time, bang out a brilliant performance, and then go do that again on another show the following week. But she didn't want to get stuck anywhere. And it's funny, we had Celeste Yarnall in the documentary. She said, Susan was our heroes, and people like me, we didn't want to get stuck on a TV series. We loved getting a little money for being a guest star, but we wanted to keep our rosters open in case a movie opportunity came up. She did get movie opportunities, but none of them panned out. They always tended to be dogs. A lot of independents that just never made it.
What got you interested in
I was going to ask the same thing. What brought this up? How did you get so interested in one actress's director life, a female director's life, that made you think, I need to make a documentary about this?
Well, I'll tell you, it was about almost exactly 3 years ago, summer 2011. I'm sitting there on Netflix watching The Cage, and I pull out my iPhone, which I do now all the time. It's a terrible habit. I look up on IMDb. I look her up. So I want to look up the guest star, and usually you look up a guest star in a Star Trek, especially if you're not even really familiar with their name, and they had like a dozen or 2 dozen credits, the last of which was in 1971, and they're like, then they're done, And I look her up, and the only other thing I knew she'd done was that Twilight Zone with Roddy McDowall.
Right.
Where,
oh, wow.
And I look her up, and there's 125 credits. It's like an 8-page. I'm like, oh my God, how do I not know this? And it's like every show you can think of in the 60s. And some of these shows 3, 4 times, 4 wagon trains, 4 Virginians, 3 Route 66s. And these aren't like nurse or receptionist, or like generic.
Right.
This is like major guest star of the episode. And I was just really embarrassed that I didn't know this. And
did she have, among the general public back then, name recognition? So if you were tuning into Route 66 and it said Susan Oliver, you knew who she was?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, you look in TV Guide and the newspaper, I mean, they would advertise that she was on. She was a household name at that time. That's the other thing. And it's just like, how do you go from that to almost completely obscure? It's shocking. It's funny. I started doing things like, and I challenge you to do this. Go on eBay and type her name in, Susan Oliver. You get 8 or 9 pages of photos of her. Everyone's selling pictures of her. She was one of the most photographed women in the 1960s, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that every time she was on a TV show, they were promoting the hell out of it. They were sending out the photograph, and so people are selling these left and right now.
So what triggered you to think, I'm going to make a film?
Yeah.
And what process did you have to go through because it's not cheap. Everybody, we talk to a lot of filmmakers, and the process that you have to go through to make a documentary, for the film stock, the amount of money that goes into it. I mean, that's a big project for one person to undertake.
And how many people said,
nuts.
she's deserving of a film because of her name recognition now, because as the title of your film says, probably what she's best known as is the Green Girl.
Yeah. Well, I just got so outraged the more I learned about her. It just bothered me so much that she slipped so much into obscurity. And plus, when you find out how it all ended for her and the frustration, I figured that out pretty quick. That she got a lot of doors slammed in her face at the end, and then she dies quite young. She dies alone, and it just I felt someone owed her something. And I know enough about the Trek subculture to know that that's one of the wonderful things about the conventions for a lot of these older guest stars, especially from original series and even the later series, that can now come and bask in the fan adulation and all that stuff. And she missed out on all that. And so I also just thought it was such a fascinating story. I read her autobiography, which there was a copy of in the LA library, and I thought, okay, if this is bad, I'm going to send it back after the first time. I couldn't put it down. It was just the most fascinating story I've ever read, and then that convinced me someone's got to do something. I didn't know if it was going to be a book or a documentary, but I figured I better start getting around and talking to some of these people, because people are in their 80s at this point,
right?
Yeah,
and they're not going to be here with us much longer. In fact, 3 of the people I interviewed of the 40 had died back in May and June of this year. I'm really sad about that, but I knew it was going to happen, so I figured it actually. A good prosumer digital camera and a decent sound package and a decent lighting package is not that expensive. And I figured, okay, why not do that? It's not that much more expensive than just recording interviews for a book. And if it ends up being a book, I've still got it on film.
Right.
And then I was just blown away at all the people that were willing to talk to me, and it just became this obsessive hunt them down kind of a thing.
Did it start to take over your life?
It did. It totally did. I mean, for a while I was working full-time and doing it in the background. Then I just, at one point, my father died, and my mother's health so I had to take a leave from work anyways. And once I got that sorted, I just didn't go back to work. And I just committed to a year of finishing the movie. We had a couple of Kickstarter and Indiegogo to raise a little money. I threw a lot of my own money in, but really, compared to what it could have cost, it really wasn't that. It was surprisingly good. And one of the things that saved us was, and I thank God for this, documentary filmmakers need to know about this, fair use. It has really come into its own in the last 10, 15 years. And I found the law firm you want to use if you do that, Donaldson and Califf. They do all the documentaries.
And that was unsolicited.
No, absolutely. But I mean, no, as a filmmaker, you want to know that. And they just... My God, it turns out you don't need to license anything. What I had to do was work in conjunction with them, me and the editor, and we would fly cuts by, and they said, yeah, this is okay, no, this is not. But as long as you're doing that, and so we didn't have to license everything. If we had to license anything, we would have been in big trouble, because the going rate is something like $150 a second. And I looked at like a still of her from the Love Boat on Getty Images, $600 for a single still. There's no way you could. I mean, I figured that would be $300,000, $400,000 easy just to license all of it. And who's going to come up with that kind of money for a documentary?
Exactly.
No one.
It's very expensive.
Yeah. So these are the things that made it possible. It was just that and a lot of time. And as Peter Durya said to me in an email at one point, I did reach out to him. He was Jose Tyler in the original Cage. And I was going to fly up to Canada and interview him, but his health prevented it, and then the poor guy died. But he said, sometimes, he's like, I love to see a good OCD kind of tendency channeled in a positive direction. And he said, I didn't know her well, but in those 2 weeks we did that pilot, you could tell she was going places, and she wasn't just your typical young starlet. There was something different about her.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting about her in the Cage is, for the longest time growing up, I never realized, and you're going to laugh, because she had the black hair when she was the Orion, I never realized it was the same person as Veena, because she was so sultry. And Veena was, so demure and please stop fighting them and all of that. And then when I got older as a teenager, that's the same woman?
Yeah. See, and that's the thing again, why it was so obvious she was going to be the one cast as Veena. She was such a versatile actress. She could just play anything. And even the dancing. I mean, it's funny. Richard Arnold did his thing on the Cage this morning here, was talking about one of their big casting criteria was she's got to be able to dance. And so Yvonne Craig was on the list. Yvonne Craig was a dancer.
Yeah.
Susan didn't know how to dance. Susan, we got it in the film. I think it comes off of Gerald Gurian's site. It's Robert Justman's script schedule, breakdown, his schedule. She had to do 2 weeks of really intensive training with a choreographer. She could do that. If she needed to learn to dance, she'd learn to dance, because she didn't even know coming into that episode how to do that.
Well, she was a true chameleon.
Yes, she really was.
Because like I said, not recognizing her, and then...
Well, and that's what you said before, too. That's another reason. The chameleon factor is another reason why she's so obscure sometimes. And people have watched the movie, and we have a lot of footage of her in a lot of different roles. And they go, I didn't even realize that was Susan Oliver. I watched it again now in your movie. When I saw that, and that's even happened to me. She did an episode of I Spy, and I remember watching that in the 70s. I had no idea that was Susan Oliver. She just became whatever the role was, and you could easily miss that you had seen her.
Now, is any kind of support or words that came from her estate?
You know what? It's really funny. I just got an email half an hour ago from her half-brother. Her father remarried, and literally, this just came in half an hour ago. This is from her brother, and he said, I just wanted to let you know that my wife and my eldest daughter and I just watched your film. We thought you did an excellent job in weaving together mosaic, and the film was captivating, touching, subtle, and brisk. Very well done. Not only that, we all learned a lot more about Susan than we knew before.
That is amazing.
Did your heart stop?
Yeah,
That's really
it really
cool.
is very touching. Thank you. It's one of the interesting things about her, by the way. Her cousin, who was almost like a brother to her, when I let him see the rough cut last December, he said we had no idea she'd done all that TV. Her life was so compartmentalized. And her mother's side of the family, the cousins, they don't know the father's side of the family, the half-brothers. They didn't meet till she was dying when she was 58 and met at her funeral in person.
She was gone way too early.
Yeah, but she was so compartmentalized, they didn't know the full extent of her acting. And then they said that at her memorial, too, which Roddenberry and Bill Thies showed up to as well. They had, or Thies, however you pronounce it, William Ware Thies. Everyone said, wow, we didn't know any of this about her. She had all these components of her, and then it was the flying. We didn't even get into that part. She was this record-setting pilot. So, she was probably the first woman, or amongst the very first women qualified and trained to fly the Learjet, and many other things. Flew a single-engine plane across the Atlantic. That was so hilarious. I'm interviewing Peter Mark Richmond, who was kind of like a male Susan Oliver. If you saw him, you go, oh, that guy. He's been in everything. And she did an episode of The Invaders with him, like 3 months after she flew across the Atlantic. And I'm asking him about it in the interview. He's like, she did what? I mean, she could do something like that and then come and not even talk about it. And
amazing.
Now you have people like Catherine Bigelow, who's won an Academy Award, and Jodie Foster is a huge... Do any of them know about Susan Oliver? And
I don't know, because people at that level don't return my calls. I tried to reach Jodie Foster because I have a clip in the movie of Susan with Jodie playing her mother in a 1973 episode of the television series Love Story.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember that show myself.
Yeah. I tried very much with the clips to emphasize all the people that really were or were about to become somebody that she worked with, as well as many Trekkie people as I could. People that were also in original Trek episodes. But and almost, with the exception of Jodie Foster, and I have a clip of her with Mia Farrow on Peyton Place, pretty much everyone she worked with that went on to be movie stars were men, like Clint Eastwood, Bruce Dern, Robert Duvall, all these people that, mostly, but Burt Reynolds. But she worked with everyone. But yeah, I did try to get Jodie to... Yeah, but the more important they are, the less likely they are going to be to respond to a small effort like this. That's been the hardest part. that's why you have a bazillion Marilyn Monroe documentaries, and I don't think the world really needs another one.
Right.
Whereas you don't have a single one about people like this, or very few.
Well, I'm absolutely enthralled, and I can't wait to sit down and watch the film. So, where can I and our listeners find your film, buy it, and watch it?
Well, we've just started selling it on the website, which is thegreengirlmovie.com. You'll find the trailer there too, so you can check that out first thing. And then if you like that, buy the DVD, which there's a link to it, and you'll have it mailed to you. Now, if you're patient and you want to wait till I think October, November, supposedly we'll be out on the digital video on demand platforms by then: iTunes, Amazon, I think Hulu, and if we're lucky, you don't know till after you make the deal, Netflix. So that'll come later this year. But right now, you can get it on
And don't worry, our listeners, if you're listening to this, that means that you've gone to gntshow.com. That link will be in the show notes.
Is there anything you'd like to add, sir? This has been really fascinating.
Well, I'm really just blown away at all the enthusiasm
How's
around
the enthusiasm been at the convention?
You know?
It doesn't hurt that you have an Orion from Cleveland.
Yeah. It's funny because it's not the biggest draw because she was a one-off with the original series, and there's so many people here that don't even know the original series that well. They're here for the other. But people are intrigued.
My water, I think,
and,
right? Or just one of yours?
People are intrigued, and there certainly are plenty of people who are enthusiastic about it. And it's just, I don't know. It's just here's my thing about it. It's one of those. How do you convince people to sit down and watch it? But once they do, they're so glad they did. And it's hard to describe what it is you're going to see. Larry Nemechek even said it. He's in the movie, by the way. And he said when he came to the premiere, he was wondering what the heck I was going to spend 96 minutes covering about the woman who played the original Orion slave girl. But after seeing it, he's like, wow.
Well, that is exactly the reason why we do what we do at the G&T show, because what we want to tell are the stories. We're all about story, and to hear her story and to talk to the person who wants to tell her story, we can't thank you enough for stopping by and talking with us. We're very excited to be able to help get the word out about the Green Girl and Green Girl Productions. And George, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
TheGreenGirlMovie.com. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you.
And this is Gettysburg 7 once again saying thank you to Mr. George Pappy from The Green Girl Movie. And we'll see you all later. Joel on True, bitches.
G&T Show is a busy little beaver production.
Music for the G&T Show is provided by Warp 11, Grethor, 5-Year Mission, and Andrew Allen's Smooth Federation.
Some dude walks out, proceeds to explain what it's all about. I sure want to leave. I think you'd agree, but we cannot leave till we find out what it's all about. It's all make-believe, nothing is permanent down here. It's just an amusement park. Bones is now alive, so it's okay for him to say, I'm a doctor, not a shish kebab. Apparently it's okay if we trust an unknown race who can read any one of our thoughts. So be careful what you wish for in this land of dreams come true, 'cause you just